with Colin. Colin, welcome. What's the lockdown been like for you? And can you tell everyone a little bit about your business as well?
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Collin from Wagtail, UK. So our business is we provide detection dogs for various disciplines, including people hiding in vehicles, so clandestines, explosives, drugs, cash, tobacco, and a number of other items. And also we've got dogs that can find elephant's ivory, pangolin scale, shark fin, bushmeat, and products of animal origin. One of the main contracts that we've got is we supply dogs for UK Border Force, and we work in northern France and in Belgium, where we provide dogs to screen vehicles that are bound for the UK, and we're looking for people hiding in those lorries illegally. So our UK work, where we may provide dogs for football stadiums, for concerts, we run courses, etc., has really gone down, if you like, obviously because of all the restrictions. But our work in France has carried on as normal. We've still got the same number of assets and dog teams out there. We've got a total of 60 dogs that are employed across 3 ports in France, which is Calais, Dunkirk, and the Channel Tunnel. And then we work at Zeebrugge as well. We work alongside Border Force officers and French authorities out there. So despite the freight levels and the traffic crossing the channel being reduced, we're still finding people attempting to cross the channel. So there's been no requirement to reduce our capability. In fact, in some areas, it's gone up. So yeah, affecting our business, it hasn't in terms of the Border Force work that we do. And you know, as I said, there's still a 24/7 requirement for the dogs to operate in these ports, and they complement other methods, you know, other screening methods such as scanners, X-rays, CO2 probes, and heartbeat monitors. So I could talk all day about it, but I appreciate there's other panelists. Yeah. So yeah, I welcome any questions on that.
Well, I'm glad that it's sort of business as usual. Of course, there's a slight twist, but it's, you know, business as usual. That's a positive message. In no particular order, if we ask Euan, Euan, how are you doing? How's your work changed since the lockdown? I think you're currently on mute. Let me see if I can solve that.
Unmute.
Oh yes, fantastic.
Over there.
If you tell everyone a little bit about yourself and how your you know, lockdown has changed everything, or not.
Yeah, well, as you can see, everyone, although I've unmuted, you probably want me to unvideo. I'm
no.
desperately waiting for lockdown to end fully so I can get to a barber's. So I desperately need a haircut, as you can see. So I'm sorry for putting you through all that. Yes, it's changed a lot. It is now very much phone to phone, video to video. The information is still getting through both ways, that we are providing, that we are receiving, but it isn't as easy. It's slower, and that's because you really do need the face-to-face touch to get some of the subtleties over, not least how the information is being received and interpreted, because our stuff is, the emphasis is largely qualitative. You can't really make the distinction with quantitative entirely. Trends, leading indicators, and where those leading indicators show promise and turn out to be valuable, or where, if they aren't, why not? And of course, learn better for next time. Currently advising a number of private and, shall we say, military and security linked companies, particularly things that might be neglected in the fallout. One is, who on earth is going to turn up where? Who are they going to be with? And what are they going to be doing as a result of the very considerable fallout from the change in the civil war situation in Libya, because there's some very interesting people from outside the country there. That has implications for the migration issue when things get back to relative normal in the Mediterranean. And also the consequences of the recession on the drugs trade and the potential for more violence. We saw what happened in Dijon in France a few days ago as a result of fears among drugs groups that either the supply will be cut, and so therefore you're fighting over a shrinking pie, although as we've just heard from several speakers and just immediately, traditional routes are still operating, for instance, France and Belgium to the UK, particularly for cocaine. But also we've got things like not just a decreased supply, but fighting over decreased demand. So there aren't enough customers to go around. We shall see if that's correct. So for instance, we would expect an increase in firearm and knife violence, particularly outside large cities, as a result of drop in incomes of casual drug users. And regarding the human trafficking initiative, which we heard such interesting material, we would also expect to see increased use of sex workers as couriers, possibly for cigarettes, but much more likely to be for small amounts of hard drugs and cannabis from late summer, autumn, should traffic get back to normal. And we would urge, shall we say, a fairly lenient approach to those victims so that we get more information about who's behind them. So that's us. It's slower, it's still moving, but it's all taking a lot longer because everybody has to look over their shoulder at the situation for their families. And if you're in the private sector, where on earth are we going to get back to normal? But thank you, everyone, for everything we've heard. Thank you.
No, I like that, and I'm glad that you can be so frank, because obviously this is a tough time for public sector agencies, and it's great to have that frankness. And also, Larry says in the comments, thank you for the mention about this presentation. So that's good. And Paddy, your universe is very different. Would you be able to tell people a little bit about Henley and Partners and how things have changed for you?
Sure. Very quickly, I'll explain who we are, what we do. We're the leaders in a relatively new niche industry. We advise global high net worth individuals on their citizenship and residence opportunity. So a quick example, you are Kenyan. You own 3 hotels and your net worth is $15 million. But because you're Kenyan, you can only go to about 50 countries around the world without applying for a visa in advance. And you certainly can't take your wife and children with you because European border security is extremely tough on letting African families in at the moment due to immigration policy. Therefore, you cannot live the life you want to. You can't make investments if you want to. You can't quickly go to Milan to go and see a supplier and Geneva to go and see some investors. Therefore, there are options because sovereign states around the world have understood that they can raise debt-free capital by securitizing their citizenship and residence rights and offering them to global investors. So said Kenyan can acquire citizenship of St. Lucia or St. Kitts and Nevis, which gives them visa-free access to Europe effectively and much of the rest of the world. They can also acquire Maltese or Cypriot citizenship for a significantly higher investment sum. And there are other residence programs around the world. One of the reasons I have the career I have is because London is one of the broadest and deepest capital markets. One of the reasons for that is because international investors can come here by paying a fee and going through the individual investor the tier 1 investor program and set up their businesses here in London and not be based in Moscow or Riyadh. They can be based in London as well. So we advise high net worth individuals on that. We also advise sovereign states on setting up programs designed to raise capital to create societal value back home through, as I say, offering citizenship or residence rights as an investment. So effectively, it's a way of raising sovereign equity
Paddy, I think we're losing you.
rather than sovereign debt. We are aware that can you hear me now?
Oh yes, it's better. Yes.
Cool, thank you. The reason I'm here is that we are aware that there are entirely legitimate concerns about the industry of which we are a major part. There are entirely legitimate concerns that said Kenyan hotel owner might well be a Kenyan hotel owner and everything is okay. At the same time, said Kenyan hotel owner might have connections to some more concerning interests in East Africa, shall we say. And we want to ensure that this is not the case. We want to ensure that the highest level of due diligence is carried out on every single applicant for citizenship and residence by investment. So we want to work in collaboration with organizations like Border Paul and everyone around this space to ensure that the highest standards are carried out. What's been quite interesting about COVID is it has created a higher demand for our services. This is less about people around the world wanting to leave where they are now. They understand that this process takes time. If anyone in this call decided that they wanted to have an additional citizenship and they called us tomorrow, they're not going to get it for at least 6 months because of the nature of the process. You have to gather together a significant identity pack. You have to have documents verified and by lawyers. You have to go through a big security and intelligence check with whichever sovereign state we're talking about. So this isn't about jumping the queue now. But what has happened is when you have significant acts of volatility like a global pandemic, like a plague, it makes high net worth individuals reassess their lives and makes them understand that they need a long-term plan as well, and they're looking for optionality. So they might not want to be where they are now when the next plague happens, especially if you're talking about Asian high net worths that have seen SARS, seed burn flu, and now seen COVID. They've seen 3 major plagues in the last 15 years. They assume another one's coming. Therefore, they want global optionality. They want to be able to live somewhere else, maybe with better healthcare, or where there is less likely chance of massive societal challenges. So yeah, look, that's what we've seen. We've seen higher demand, but admittedly, during the lockdown, you can't process the higher demand because people need to be able to travel to complete the transactions. People need to be able to travel to collate the documents and have them authorized. But we see a very large pipeline of demand coming and is beginning to be unlocked as lockdown gets easier in certain parts of the world. So that's us. That's where we are.
Fantastic, and I hope everyone appreciates just how broad this panel is, because when we talk about the pandemic and ports and borders, it's got so many areas we can go to. Well, let's go to Sebastian next. Thank you. Of course, IATA very kindly speaks at a number of these events, and we've already heard about dreams for the evolution of PNR data. Hope you're taking notes, or I don't know. Would you tell everyone a little bit about what you do? And of course, we know IATA, but what you do and what's changed?
Hi, thanks, Colin. Hi, everyone. So I'm part of IATA, and my current position is border management, and I've joined this position in the field of capacity building, so helping states to develop their API and PNR program. I've got a strong background in aviation security, And this is, I think, the link between, giving the data and using the data for a specific purpose. So I just wanted to start maybe stating the obvious here, but it's an important one for us, is that the magnitude of the impact for the airline industry and more broadly for the entire air transport industry is something that has never seen before. It's beyond a catastrophe for us currently. So whilst cargo operations have remained strong and have helped to carry essential goods to fight the pandemic, and even if there are some signs currently that are positive in terms of reopening borders and facilitating travel, it will take years to recover. And this is why I think it's important for us to here talk with border forces, states, and all the stakeholders that are involved in the passenger journey at some point. And so what we have seen happening during the crisis from an airline perspective is first a very uncoordinated manner to close the border to traffic. So it was, and we fully understand why states were doing their best to protect their territory from the outbreak. But what we got in return was very short notice. We had issue with the crew status. I take the example of a crew that has to spend the night at the arrival airport, what we call overlay crew, and that on day one they were allowed in the country, but on day two they were not allowed to leave it anymore. So that was creating havoc in our flight schedule. Same for the passenger status. Yeah, okay. Sometimes there were some passengers were banned to come from a specific country, but the regulation that implemented this restriction forgot about the transit passenger that may have bought at another point or that may have remained inside of the aircraft. So what about them? And with no answer, but your passengers are there at the airport. So what do you do? And all this type of difficulties around operation that were associated with the border closing. So we pushed hard to improve that, and actually we received very positive collaboration from the state to ease this process and facilitate the travel of at least the aircraft and the crew. And it was essential during this crisis for cargo operation to remain in the air. In fact, this is probably one side of the airline industry that is doing very well, if not as well as it's never been seen before, because they've been deemed essential to fight the pandemic. So coming back to your initial question and the API and PNR element, I think what we've seen as well is a multiplication of requirement to get additional data from the passenger, which is understandable in the current context. And we've got 192 states that are part of ICAO, the global organization setting the rules for aviation. And I think we've got 192 different set of questions regarding additional passenger data. So we've got contact tracing, we've got passenger location element, and we've got health data. And it's a nightmare currently as we restart slowly the industry, that even that is not aligned. So we're trying to push and to support states that have taken an approach, a common approach, or at least a more leaner approach to get this data. And so we have seen very good example, and this is where a crisis lead to opportunities. We've seen very good example of state being creative to get this data, and at very low cost. So a number of states have designed web-based portal, government web-based portal, where a passenger can just include quickly their data, send it to the government database, and then demonstrate somehow at the airline or at the border authorities upon arrival that this data has been provided. And so we thought it was a very good process where the airlines are not responsible for for the data that are, when it's about health, quite dangerous to share through third party. So we have taken this as a very good approach, and that should be looked in the future as a way during the next pandemic, as someone mentioned before. So next time, maybe that's the way forward. Have this kind of web-based portal ready and just tune them to the specificity of the crisis that you're facing, and potentially link this web-based portal to an electronic answer and an electronic travel authorization, for example. So you're only allowed to board if this data have been provided to the state. And it leads me maybe to my last comment in relation to this data. I know that it may sound very easy to ask the airline to change something about the API and PNR system, but in fact, it is not simple at all. API is API. It's a list of set elements. There is a standard for that, and this is what you get out of the machine-readable zone of a passport. So a new element will require manual input at the check-in, and in this time of social distancing, manual input at check-in is probably not what you want to do. And for PNR, it's even worse. PNR, those are the data that are collected in the normal course of business. So if you don't collect them in the normal course of business, they're not there. So you can ask for it, but if they're not there, they're not there. And so it's very difficult for airlines to include additional elements and to require them to the passenger, because sometimes it's not the airline talking to the passenger when they're buying their tickets. It's, you know, through a travel center, to a travel agent. So we've got no control about that. So what's inside of PNR? Well, for most of the time, we've got no control about the quality, and we've got no control about what the passengers are putting in it. It's very difficult to use these elements. So closing remark here, please, when you look at these new elements, there are some standards that needs to be observed, and there are creative ways that have been put on the table recently to adapt to this crisis, and that will allow the airlines and the airport to recover without additional administrative burden. So
okay, well, no, you know, that's really handy, because we've had the idea, and now you've blown the idea out of the water. It's fantastic. We get to do this in real time. This is the technology. I'm glad, because of course I know, API and PNR data is kind of immutable. So, you know, but people say give it to them to do. It's not my problem. It's an interesting angle. And this particular panel, being so diverse, is the first time we've just come, actually, let's bring all wider stakeholders together, even though you completely from different universes. Obviously, Greg, still from planet Earth. What's life like for the Independent Cities Association, public affairs, and of course your role within Borderpol?
Yeah, thank you very much, Phelim, and good day to everybody. Yeah, I serve as a director with Borderpol, vice president of corporate relations. But you know, my day job, I'm based here in Los Angeles. I'm a government consultant and represent a variety of companies. You know, with the common theme of needing help with navigating the public process with government, both at the federal, state, and local level. These companies are either doing business with government or would like to do business with government and need a helping hand to kind of navigate that process. One of my long-term clients is a group called the Independent Cities Association, which is a nonprofit association consisting of 40 cities here in Los Angeles County. And those of you that have been, you know, to Los Angeles understand it's a sprawling metropolis. But we have, in about a 45 square mile area, 88 different cities that reside, you know, just in that area, all of which have their own individual governments, if you will, their own mayor, their own city councils, their own budgets. So a lot of what I do is interface with my private sector clients and these various government entities that are making individual decisions about technology, and services that they're providing their residents. You know, all in the context of also depending heavily on what the state government does in terms of funding, legislation, as well as the federal government. So it is a rather complex process, and you know, we're no short of a lot of government, a lot of elected officials in Southern California. So then COVID comes here, you know, 3 or 4 months ago. So it's been really surreal. Obviously, government is you know, scrambling to provide services to residents from a health perspective, and trying to maintain the basic level of services that they provide their residents, despite a huge drop in revenue coming in. And I mean, these smaller cities in particular, and the state and the feds to some degree, require or rely heavily on sales tax as a revenue source. So you can imagine with all the businesses that are closed down, whether it be a restaurant or a car, whatever it might be, those sources of revenue are, if not completely gone, substantially reduced. So there's just a these governments are struggling to figure out how they can continue to provide the services that their residents enjoy and expect at the same levels, with reduced budgets. So you know, even you know, you're seeing government entities that are placing employees on leave of absences. They've had to cut their costs and just to maintain basic levels of services. So it's been an interesting dynamic. Then you have the what's happened here in the last 30 days with the racial tensions that are going on, and so a lot of big movement about public safety reform, particularly with police departments, talk about defunding public safety and those kind of things, which is a you know, a dynamic that's going on right now. A lot at the local level, at the state level, at the federal level. Not sure where that's going to end up, but it is something that is just you know, dominating the landscape right now. And if you're a company, that is either doing business or wants to do business, it's kind of a challenge right now, because the decision makers, and I mean typically the elected officials, are really have to be focused on these immediate challenges that they have. And you know, it is what it is. But you know, hopefully we're going to see that, you know, there's some light at the end of the tunnel. But right now it's been interesting, but it continues to be a challenge to deal with these limited budgets. Yet a constituency, the residents that you know, expect and require a certain level of service, and so it is. It is, like I said, it's an interesting dynamic right now. So again, once again, Phil, I appreciate the opportunity, and as a Border Patrol representative, I'm particularly honored to serve on such a esteemed panel here and represent what I think is really a fantastic organization.
Fantastic. Well, I hope all panelists and all audience members appreciate that we don't normally put such a diverse group of panelists together, but this is such an unprecedented event that, you know, to simply say, right, we're going to do one panel on canine and search, and one panel on immigration, and one panel on aviation, and one panel on customs, and one, you know, it's much better that we all get together. I hope you agree. And obviously that means that we don't get enough time for every specific topic. Impromptu, I had an idea. Can I put your email addresses in the chat box? Would you all be happy for me to do that? You'll be okay? Can I do that?
Yeah, yes,
Sure,
of course.
sure.
Absolutely.
All right, fantastic. Well, during the next presentation, I'll just put them down so that people can actually connect. Nice activity on LinkedIn and Twitter and so on. So please give our fantastic and very diverse panel a round of applause. Thank you very much. I'll start off with this wonderful clapping. It's a pleasure to welcome you. Bob is clapping. Peter's clapping. Yes, it's been great. Well, I will see you in the audience, and thank you very much for your time, Colin, Paddy, Sebastian, Greg, and Euan.
Thank you. Thanks
Thank
again.
you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip.
Thanks, Philip.